China says it won't publish youth unemployment data until it reviews how the data is collected. The announcement comes amid reports of high youth unemployment.
I think the problem is that the government thinks that there is an appropriate rate of economic growth.
China, behind the soaring skyscrapers, giant industrial cities and dazzling development, a quiet wave of unrest is growing. Young people, once proud to be part of the economic miracle, are now tired of feeling the burden of the system on their shoulders. Lack of educational opportunity, unemployment, repressive rule, and unlimited surveillance. All this is driving Chinese youth into a silent but deep anger against the Xi Jinping administration. Maybe not on the streets, but a rebellion is brewing in the minds. Some see this as a temporary unrest. Others see it as a harbinger of a major change coming against the CCP. But why is China's younger generation turning against the CCP? Where can this quiet anger lead? And what will Xi Jinping do about these growing whispers of rebellion? Let's dig deeper together to trace these critical questions. Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and hit the like button. China's demographics are critical to understanding the scale of such a social movement. With a population of around 1.4 billion people, the country is, according to recent data, becoming an aging society, but still harbours a huge number of young people. According to United Nations estimates, the population between the ages of 15 and 24 makes up about 18% of China's total population. This translates into an estimated 235 to 250 million young people. Given that such a large number of young people harbour discontent with the state and the government, it is not hard to understand the potential repercussions of potential unrest. When China's state media publishes official figures on rising youth unemployment, the picture often looks rosier than it actually is. But independent analysis suggests the situation is much more dramatic. According to official statistics, the unemployment rate among 16 to 24-year-olds has recently hovered around 20%. About a year ago, the rate was around 14%. This means that youth unemployment is on the rise. In other words, with a rough calculation, it is possible to say that at least 45 to 50 million people between the ages of 15 and 24 in China either cannot find a job at all or have given up looking for a job. Of course, this is only the picture that emerges when we look at the official figures. Unofficial assessments point to a higher pool of unemployment that has not yet been recorded. So what does it mean that so many young people are unemployed? First of all, in Xi Jinping's grand vision of what he calls the Chinese dream, economic stability and prosperity is one of the most important veins feeding the party's social legitimacy. The rapid employment and social status of young university graduates, especially in urban areas, was seen as an advertisement for the miracle of development achieved by the Communist Party. But slowing economic growth, trade tensions, and a slower than expected post-pandemic recovery mean that there are no longer enough opportunities for young people to join the workforce. Millions of young people, especially the 11 million or so new university graduates each year, are becoming angry with the regime when they cannot find decent, well-paid jobs. On top of that, abnormally high housing prices, the inadequacy of the social security system at some points, and the increasing difficulty of making a living in the big cities are further dampening young people's hopes for the future. Previously, the popularity of movements such as Tang and Bailan on social media was interpreted as an expression of the youth's thought that the system is not working for me, so I am withdrawing myself. Crushed under the weight of an uncertain future and the consequences of a failing economy, Bailan was the preferred attitude and lifestyle of the young crowd. Bailan's attitude was not the first sign of a lazy culture in China. In 2021, Tang gained popularity. This meant aiming for a life of low aspiration and rejecting the rat race altogether. Tang was also a product of the lifestyle and economic changes that came with COVID and its reflection in the daily lives of Chinese youth. But the main discourse that comes with Bailan is that it has a much more drastic impact and response system. where young people deliberately leave a deteriorating situation as it is. They literally leave a deteriorating situation to rot and make no effort to restore balance. This angry laxity is at the opposite extreme of the work culture practiced in China until it is outlawed by the Supreme People's Court in August 2021. This meant working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week to push the country's economic growth in a toxic and inhumane way. Recently, however, there has been talk that this passive attitude may be replaced by a tendency to openly challenge the ruling elite. It is a relatively new development that there has been an increase in the number of young people directly criticising Xi Jinping, especially on campuses or on social media platforms. The Chinese Communist Party, of course, does not reflect these criticisms in the state media. In fact, protests or online rebellions targeting Xi Jinping are often censored, and even known influencers or activists are detained for disrupting public order. Despite all these repressive measures, the level of reaction from young people is increasing. These reactions are partly reflected in the outside world. In the Hong Kong protests, in the view of Taiwan, even in the rise of feminist movements on social media, it is clear that young people think differently from the party line. It is also possible to see that rising unemployment is fueling these reactions. The question is, can this discontent really turn into a revolt against Xi Jinping? Given China's authoritarian nature, large-scale protests or open political demonstrations are always harshly suppressed. But pro-reform factions within the party warn that the growing complaints of young people about the economy and living conditions could lead the regime to face a crisis of legitimacy. Xi Jinping has repeatedly emphasized social stability and national development, but if youth unemployment spirals out of control, the social fallout could be huge. Even China's famous social credit system or strict control mechanisms may not be enough to silence a large number of young people for long. From a demographic perspective, China will soon become an aging society. In 2022, China's population fell for the first time in decades, and in 2023, India overtook China to become the world's most populous country. For a population to maintain its size, the total fertility rate needs to be around 2.1 children per woman. As a result of decades of population control measures, fertility rates in China have fallen well below this threshold. By the 1990s, China's fertility rate had fallen to 1.5 births per woman, and by 2020 it had fallen to a historically low 1.3 births per woman. Chinese leaders responded to China's falling fertility rates by relaxing the one-child policy. Starting in 2013, all parents who were themselves only children were allowed to have a second child. In 2016, the government extended this policy to all couples and officially ended the one-child policy. These policies did not alleviate the problem. When the government eased the one-child policy in 2013, officials projected 2 million additional births in 2014, but only 470,000 more people were born in 2014 than in 2013. Similarly, China's birth rate continues to decline, despite the government's recent encouragement to have 3 children. Between 2010 and 2020, China's average household size fell from 3.1 to 2.6 people. Rising housing prices and an overall increase in the cost of living have made raising children financially difficult for many. In 2019, the average cost of raising a child in China until the age of 18 was reported to be almost 7 times the country's GDP per capita. The COVID-19 pandemic and China's zero-COVID policies have exacerbated the situation. In 2022, reports emerged that strict COVID-19 lockdowns limited hospital access, even for expectant mothers, further discouraging some from wanting to have children during the pandemic. So falling birth rates, the long-term effects of the one-child policy, are rapidly changing the country's population pyramid. While the growth of the labour force is slowing down, the increase in the retired population is also a huge economic burden. Normally, young people should be able to enter the workforce quickly and contribute productively so that this burden can be balanced. But if millions of young people are unemployed or languishing in part-time informal jobs, China's economy could face a serious downturn in the next decade. Add to this the sluggish post-COVID recovery. falling global demand, trade tensions with the US and high-tech sanctions, and a storm of widespread disillusionment with Xi Jinping could grow. On the other hand, perhaps the party machinery will develop new policies to turn this situation around. For example, reducing the gap between rural and urban areas, offering special incentives to young people in the technology sector, and supporting start-up companies. Nevertheless, the youth unemployment rate, which according to current data reaches 20%, is a problem that the Xi Jinping administration must urgently solve. Otherwise, forms of protest such as lying on social media trends may turn into much more political, direct street action. The ability to coordinate local riots nationally via the internet is probably the party's biggest fear. If economic woes combine with the fact that young people are no longer susceptible to blind party loyalty, Xi Jinping's ideal of the Chinese dream could start to falter. It is well known that young people are most engaged in the digital world, following global trends and comparing developments abroad with their own circumstances. Faced with the pride of being the second largest economy in the world on the one hand, and the reality of being unemployed for a long time after graduation on the other, young people are finally starting to ask, why are we stuck in the wheel of this system? Even the party's best propaganda tools may struggle to completely suppress this questioning. Recently, small-scale protests in cities, criticism of the party in on-campus forums, or black humour on the social media seem to be the main signs of a backlash against Xi Jinping. In the eyes of the authorities, these may be small-scale unrest. But if we look at China's history, it is important to remember that most major political transformations have been sparked by university student movements or a youth wave. The Tiananmen Square protests in 1989 were precisely around young people's demands for reform and freedom. Of course, Xi Jinping's administration is capable of suppressing the protests with today's technology, but when the source of discontent has economic roots, repression alone cannot solve the problem. At this point, the number of Chinese young people willing to emigrate abroad is on the rise. Particularly qualified, well-educated young people with language skills and experience abroad are choosing to move to the US, Canada, Europe, or some neighbouring Asian countries, saying, "There are not enough opportunities left in the country." The rise of this so-called brain drain could undermine China's medium and long-term development plans. The reluctance of these young people, who today may be building bridges with foreign companies or universities, to return to China in the future, may also undermine the Xi administration's dream of a great power. All of these developments are putting serious pressure on Xi Jinping's leadership. For perhaps the first time, there is a clear erosion of trust and support from the youth within the party. Nevertheless, it is important to remember that the Communist Party apparatus has a very powerful propaganda and control system. So, it is unlikely that we will suddenly see a revolution on the streets. However, it is difficult to predict what the cracks that are growing little by little will evolve into over time. Those who want reform in the country may confront those who resist the authoritarian line. Such internal tensions, coupled with economic problems and international sanctions, it seems inevitable that Xi Jinping's image as a historical leader will be severely tested. So for what reasons does the average Chinese youth oppose Xi Jinping? Some might say that their own future plans have fallen through, that they are afraid of disappointing their parents' expectations as well as the cost of their education. Some may say that housing prices have risen to exorbitant levels, and that even if they find a good job, owning a house by their 30s is a dream. Others may complain about the lack of housing, healthcare, and social security in the city. What they all have in common is that they feel that the rhetoric of the party is building a future for us does not resonate in reality. This digitally savvy generation is watching living standards abroad and asking, why are we having such a hard time? China's failure to take structural reform steps, bureaucratic sluggishness, and the prioritization of a network of connections and favoritism known as guanxi are also contributing to young people's anger. Increased repressive measures, more censorship on the internet, and the ubiquity of Xi Jinping's propaganda are further fueling this anger. This is because young people are no longer accepting one-way messages, but are instead trying to raise their own voices. Of course, the Communist Party can launch economic packages or social campaigns to suppress, or at least keep in check, this mass of unemployed and angry young people. But job creation relies on long-term economic growth, and China's economy is in a slowdown. In its 2025 growth projections, the World Bank predicts a 4 to 5% growth rate for China, which is low compared to the record 8 to 10% in previous years. Moreover, factors such as high-tech sanctions, the partial shift of the supply chain out of China, and the trade war with the US could further constrain this growth. With youth unemployment already at 20%, it is unclear how Xi Jinping's administration will overcome its legitimacy crisis if this figure rises even higher. Some analysts say Xi Jinping could divert the youth's attention with nationalist moves. For example, by escalating tensions over Taiwan, a fight against external enemies narrative could be created, or by opening a new focus of conflict with Japan in the South China Sea. Public anger could be directed outwards. Historically, authoritarian regimes have tended to use external tensions to quell internal crisis. But in the global order of the 21st century, this strategy may be riskier, especially when the economy is already in trouble. An escalation of sanctions for the sake of a military adventure could result in the collapse of the system. Moreover, most young people do not believe that such geopolitical moves will improve their standard of living. They want more freedom, more jobs, better wages. Hearing great power rhetoric is not enough to fill their bellies. When we look at this picture, the headlines about rebellion in China may seem a bit exaggerated, but the dissatisfaction of young people with Xi Jinping is really palpable. It would be a prophecy to say that this situation will turn into a mass revolution or street clashes in the short term. But, in terms of the future of the regime, we can see the seeds of a slowly growing wave of unrest being sown. At a time when China is entering a stage of demographic breakdown, with an aging population, rising youth unemployment, slowing economic growth, and bitter foreign relations storms, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the Communist Party to maintain internal stability. If Xi Jinping starts to lose this young audience, the party's strategies for cultural and ideological hegemony could be undermined. Of course, only time will tell the reality of all this. Perhaps the party will bring down youth unemployment rapidly with new reforms. Perhaps it will emphasize investments in technology and increase startup support for university graduates. But today's picture is one in which tens of millions of young people are facing many challenges and questioning Xi Jinping's propaganda as hope fades. This picture can be described as a mini riot, at least in terms of reactions on social media and in everyday life. What do you think? Are China's youth really turning against Xi Jinping, or is this just a media exaggeration? If youth unemployment continues to hover around 20%, how will the Communist Party maintain its economic miracle narrative? Or will a more radical control mechanism come into play in the future to suppress any protests? We look forward to your comments. Thank you for watching us. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and hit the like button. In the upcoming broadcasts, we will continue to bring you geopolitical developments in different geographies, economic turmoil, and important dynamics shaping the world. Goodbye.